the Borough Council meeting for October the 6th to order. This, for those of you who are visitors, this is the committee workshop for standing committees at the Borough Council. And following this meeting, or at 7:30, whichever happens to be the most convenient, we will convene the regular Borough Council meeting for this evening. All right, so we need approval of the committee minutes from September 1st, 2020 for this same committee workshop. Do we have a motion for that?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mrs. Martin?
No.
I'm sorry. Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the vote as unanimous.
Thank you. All right, so we go to the first committee, Municipal and Community Outreach. Mrs. Agerton.
So we met, we discussed our social media policy, so we will be coming back to meet again to update and talk with the board there about some proposed policies for our website and other social media uses. We also discussed updating the website and discussion of upcoming town halls and engagement of our community members. So I think we're off to a good start in setting some goals and being able to meet on a monthly basis.
All right, and it says here that we're going to do the approval of meeting minutes of September the 3rd. Do we do that as a whole council?
No, the committee does that. That's Zoom.
I'll make that motion, and that was a virtual meeting.
Yes.
Okay, you have a motion
I'll second.
and a second.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the vote as unanimous.
All right, very good. Community and Economic Development, Mr. Miller.
I just have a question for the manager. Where are we at with the comprehensive development people? Have they gotten back to us yet?
Yes, they're trying to set up interviews. They're from the Pittsburgh area, so the numbers for COVID are going up and down. Their companies sometimes letting them travel, sometimes not letting them travel. We're going to try to set something up here in around budget meetings and everything else for them to come in and gather data from us, from staff in-house, and then they'll take it back out. Then they want to set up a meeting with.
I think we had discussed a joint meeting.
That's what this was to talk about during tonight. Figure out when we wanted to do that. Do we want to do it before a finance meeting? To be honest with you, most of council is at a finance meeting. That would be a good time. You would have Finance Ordinance Administration, which is Mr. Anthony, yourself, and Mr. Weber, and then the Community Economic is yourself, Ms. Egerton, and Councilman Anthony also. So,
yeah, so then it'd be a good idea if we schedule that around a finance committee meeting, because then we have to add Councilman Egerton.
okay, so we can set that up. Once we get the data, once they're here and collect the data, then I'll get back to the committee and we can set up.
Do you think that they would do that prior to the finance committee meeting already have set up?
We're going to try.
Okay.
Would it be appropriate to set up tentatively so we can put it on the calendar, for example, for the 26th, and then push it if it's not ready?
Well, I don't know when they're going to have stuff available. They may not have anything ready to go to present until the beginning of next year. So
Okay.
it depends on how much in depth they're going to go and what things need changed.
Okay. So stand by.
Yes.
Comprehensive plan update. Well, that's all I have for community economic development tonight.
Okay, we move on. Mr. Anthony, Finance Administration and Ordinance.
Thank you. And I have a motion from a committee member to approve the minutes.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks. Sorry.
Saved you the trouble.
Yeah. Can't get used to that.
Well, for this part of the meeting, it's not necessary. We can handle that.
So, discussion on draft nepotism policies as drafted by the solicitor.
Yes, I'll just start off with the solicitor provided us with two drafts of the anti-nepotism ordinance. You'll see there option one and option two. And the differences between option one and option two are significant in the scope of how the limitation is treated. So in option one, there's pretty much an outright ban on the hiring of relatives. In option two, you'll read that there is a restriction on the management of one relative by another and the hiring of one relative by another. So there's not a ban per se on hiring somebody that is a family member, but there is a ban on the direct management of one family member by another. So that's the differences between the two ordinances, and we can discuss. I mean, my preference is option two. I think it gives a little more leeway in terms of, some of the concerns that were expressed to me and at the last committee meeting by President Weber, that there would be too much restriction on the hiring of personnel in the borough if we do have an outright ban. So I think that the option two addresses that. Additionally, it addresses, both ordinances address the temporary workers, which was brought up by the assistant manager Boyer at the last.
Do we really need an ordinance?
Yes, I believe we do really need an ordinance.
I don't think we do. I think it could be handled under no way manual.
Well, at the last council meeting, the entire council voted unanimously to have the ordinance drafted. So at that time, there was a unanimous agreement that the ordinance was to be drafted, which the solicitor did. And I think it should be an ordinance because, as an ordinance, it's enforceable, and it gives weight behind the policy, and that is why I believe it should be an ordinance.
The good news about the timing on this is that we get to make it part of the update to our ordinances, so it's not costing us any additional money to do, am I right?
If we were to advertise it at the same time we advertise the other ordinance, it's possible.
It depends on how quick we get this put through. If this goes through quickly, yeah, I think we can send it over and have it included. They had one or two little, you saw the review stuff that they sent, I sent it out to the committee. They sent over the review items to go over. There was only one correction they had in there that they wanted some clarification on, and I sent that back already. So they're moving along. They're in the basically proofreading phase right now. Unless council has any massive changes that they require on that, on what's been already done, they're gonna have that back to us. I think their schedule was sometime before the end of the year.
And that was going to go to the solicitor then for review at that time? Didn't we call for that?
Well, she already reviewed it.
Oh, you did?
I thought that we had the revised copy.
We had the draft,
Okay.
yes. And that there's typos and that's not proofread yet, so.
So, I hate to be off topic, but was the target date on that December 4th?
They wanted it back, I have to look at the email, I think it's November 4th is when they wanted it back. Or December, it was November or December 4th they wanted it back, yes.
I have no problem with including it in that revision if it saves us some money. I'm okay with that.
So in this discussion of this, a couple of questions for the solicitor perhaps. Is a nepotism ordinance something that is common in other municipalities or townships that you're aware of?
It is common when it is what I've reviewed and researched in Pennsylvania between boroughs, between townships, between cities, the different classifications. It's typically an ordinance that I've seen. It's just and I haven't researched all the different, municipalities throughout Pennsylvania, but for the majority of what I looked at and reviewed that in crafting this is giving an option 1 and an option 2 with the guidance and some comments from Assistant Manager Boyer, making sure we're reflecting that there's no retroactivity for that concerning existing employees. Both ordinances were also reviewed by the Labor Council, as was directed by Council, and I incorporated Attorney Miller's suggestions in both option 1 and option 2.
That's a follow-up question?
Have you, checked the surrounding municipalities for this type of ordinance? Like Camp Hill, Moonlight, Upper Allen? Do they have that type of ordinance?
I have not, I don't recall if I reviewed those, but I believe Carlisle Borough does.
Carlisle.
Well, I tried to do a search to find them, I couldn't find any, but I was apparently looking in the wrong place. I did find some information from the state, and the state refers basically to the Pennsylvania Ethics Act, which you talked about last time. And so we are all bound by that, I presume. And so that's why I'm struggling with this being an ordinance. I think Kyle and I have already gone around about this in emails. I too, as Councilman Whitcomb stated, I think it should be added to our policy manual, our personnel policy manual. Seems to me that falls under the guidelines of the Ethics Act to begin with. So that gives it some teeth. And I'm not sure if, and I heard what you said, Kyle, about an ordinance gives it, a little more oomph, so to speak. But I don't see that our personnel policy is not enforceable either.
Well, I think council can enforce the employee personnel manual.
Here's my reasoning on this. I think by going to this extent, we are really limiting ourselves in who we can hire. And there could be circumstances where a highly qualified person who happens to be related to somebody in the same department would apply, and we can't hire them. And they might be the best person for the job.
To me, it sounds like the reasoning for using it as a policy is so that you can create an exemption for the policy.
No. I just don't see that we need to go through all of the.
To me, first of all, the reason to do it as an ordinance is one, so you can't have exceptions, like was just mentioned, that the point of the policy is to have the separation and to get rid of the stigma of nepotism, and that being a leader in this, I think, is a good thing for the borough. When to me, an anti-nepotism policy speaks to good governance, speaks to transparency, it speaks to using the taxpayer dollars as wisely as possible, and it speaks to professionalism and good management. It just makes sense to me, and that's why I see it as being an ordinance rather than just merely a policy, specifically for the reason that President Weber just mentioned, when you can ignore it when.
No, that's not what I said. You're putting words in my mouth now.
You said.
Maybe I didn't say it correctly. Let me rephrase.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, this is so inclusive that we're bound to not hiring anyone. Your interpretation of what I said was the policy would allow us to do that. That's not what I'm saying. The policy would allow us to do the same thing as this ordinance if it were in the policy, but it's not there right now. And I guess my argument is, if an ordinance is more enforceable than the current personnel policy, why do we have a personnel policy? Is our personnel policy not enforceable?
Can we ask the solicitor that question? What is the difference between policy and ordinance, specifically as it relates to something like this?
Well, an ordinance is a law, similar to a statute that's adopted. A policy is just that, is a policy. Now, as far as the employment policy, that would be more in the purview of Attorney Miller and looking at that, but I believe Manager Zazurski had indicated there is no current reference of nepotism.
That is correct.
In the existing
That's correct.
policy. That only applies to, as I understand it, to current employees, would not apply to prospective employees, I believe, for that, without reviewing that and looking at that. The Ethics Act, too, only applies to the elected officials, not to anyone that's not an elected official. So the ambit of that is really just constrained to, which I think this council is well aware of the limitations that's required, and has been complied with by this council historically. This, on option 2, how I drafted it, paragraph A under 13.4 says relatives of borough employees or appointed authority may be considered for employment on the basis of their individual qualifications.
Right.
So I crafted option 2 as a broader prospect here for that. We're not saying that people who are related to other employees cannot apply, but there is some guidance in here and requirements as to what will occur, not only once they're hired, as far as the supervision and management, where we wouldn't have the direct supervision of related individuals.
So if I can push the question a little bit further, I apologize. So if I understand it, and I don't know that I do, the difference between an ordinance and a policy has to do with what happens if you violate it. Right?
Correct.
If you violate the law, that's one thing. If you violate a policy, that's something a lot different. And so in your sense, something like this should it be a policy, or should it be an ordinance?
It's really a policy decision for council here on that. I was directed to draft it as an ordinance. I would say that a lot of the ordinances that I reviewed, they call it the anti-nepotism policy within the ordinance. So to say it's what's the difference for that, but to the extent it's not adopted in the constraints of an ordinance, the enforceability is exactly that. So, that's...
We do have other policies that are ordinances.
Correct.
So, Councilman Weber, my next question is for you. Would you, if this were going to be a policy as opposed to an ordinance, would you change the language in it in some way, or would you keep it the same?
No, I wouldn't change the language at all. I just don't see why we need to go through all of the things that we have to do with advertising and paying for advertising and all that when we don't need to do it.
The policy is a policy.
Well, you don't have to advertise it though.
And if we can handle things through a policy, why make an ordinance to cover the policy we already have? Which we don't have yet, but if we would, there'd be no sense in making it an ordinance.
My initial problem with this ordinance was the section that goes through every relative that you have. And I voiced that when this came up, if you recall. I just...
In other words, you can't hire a second cousin twice removed.
It almost gets to that point of being a little ridiculous to me. And so that's why I'm not in favor of the ordinance, simply because I think even though draft number 2 is better, I still think the relatives thing doesn't need to be as specific as it is. And that's why I think that a policy would be just as serving, well served to the borough as an ordinance would be. That's just my personal opinion. It doesn't mean council has to take that opinion.
Well, I think if you don't define exactly what a relative is, I think it basically makes the whole ordinance like null and void, because you might say, well, I don't identify them as a relative to me. So I think without spelling it out, it's pretty subjective.
Well, can I interject? I mean, and this is something that Glenn and I talked about with this. I have a couple of questions too. One, we can, from an HR standpoint, she cannot ask that question when we're doing interviews.
It's
So-
related.
Yes.
Okay.
So someone can put on there, I mean, the same way we can't ask how many kids you got when we're doing interviews. That's out, you're not allowed to do that anymore. The only way we find that out is when they fill out their insurance paperwork.
I was under the impression that's not correct.
And that is correct. She's the HR director, this is the stuff that she's looked at and things that have happened. This is why she is in most of the interviews that happen, because some of the department heads ask questions that you're not supposed to ask. That could get us in trouble. We find out down the road that someone lied on their application, our personnel policy says you're terminated.
We could put a box on the application listing all those types of relatives and ask the question on the application. Are you related to any of these people that work there? And the person's gonna sign the application saying, no, they're not. What happens if we find out 2 years down the road, they lied on their application? And they're a good employee, but they lied on their application. They have a first cousin that works here.
So I fill out applications before that will say, are you related to
Yeah.
persons, and so,
But if they don't check anything,
okay, then,
we can't go to
then
them
it's
and
not
say,
determination.
but we find out now, later on down the road, that it comes out that, they told this person that they were related to Glenda.
But are we talking about, like, and then I go back to the definition of what, like, if we're defining nepotism, my third cousin probably isn't, like, that you didn't know, but yet, okay, maybe my sister comes into play. I think that if we're going to have a policy or ordinance, there might need to be some definition, but relatives can be a loosey-goosey kind of term.
So in the ordinance proposed, it would be
It's very restrictive.
very restrictive. I have 57 first cousins. Most of them I wouldn't know if they walked in this room because my mother was the baby of a very large family and most of them are twice my age. So, somebody may be related and not even know it.
Right.
So,
I think the point though is that it deals with relationships in which you know. That is the point of the nepotism ordinance, is to prevent the bias based on the knowledge that you are related to this person. If you don't have that knowledge, then there theoretically is no bias.
So if somebody checks that box and says we're not related and down the road, we find out there would be no recourse even though it's an ordinance because they supposedly didn't know that person worked here when they filled out the application.
I think under paragraph D it addresses that, though. It says employees who subsequently become relatives of the first cousin to this.
The example,
Remember
this
that-
was a relative to somebody that worked here and she didn't realize it.
I thought that item D was referencing, say, two people that work for the borough got married, or
But
whatever.
isn't it would be favoritism, correct? Like, we're trying to prevent people from hiring due to favoritism and ties.
It's very broad. The first cousin, the aunt-in-law, the uncle-in-law. If it was a little, I wouldn't have any problem with husbands, children's parents, brothers and sisters. Everyone knows those relatives and can be relatively honest about them.
And then the next part of it would be a direct supervision, correct?
Yeah.
We don't want to supervise our husbands or kids and stuff like that.
I just think it's really broad.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with the definition as it stands. I think that you have to define what it is. I think the ordinance does allow for, in the case where you discover, for some reason, that you are related, that it would fall under some sort of pre-existing relationship, like we have with all our people who are related to each other now, and it would not apply in those situations unless it's against the direct management. It's not retroactive.
The only people that we're not hiring in this case are people who are going to be a direct report to the relative. You can work here and be related in any of these ways to other people here, just not to your direct report, right?
Correct.
Am I interpreting it correctly?
That's not a question the original.
Whether it's a policy or a law.
That's correct.
And so,
And
I get back to, you just said exactly what it should be, John. That's exactly what this policy should say. And period. End of discussion. You don't need the rest of that stuff.
I think you do. You have to define what all of it, what it is.
I'm not sure how you don't have it in there, Gary, I'm trying to understand, when you, are you saying take out all that language there?
I'm saying what you just said,
Yeah,
which was, if you're not in direct supervision by somebody, you can be hired here.
that's true, but you have to put what is that somebody, otherwise it could be, relative 27 times, right? You don't wanna make it so broad that it could be anybody, you wanna define it into a small group.
Well, there's not a very small group that's defined.
I understand what you're saying. And so if that's the will of
Couldn't
the
you
council.
just make the statement that letter starts with? Where was it?
You're referencing E?
And all this can be put into a policy manual, I don't know why we're going through all this.
We have to go through whether it's a policy or a law, right?
Includes relationship by blood or adoption, and relationship by marriage is defined by state law. If it's defined by state law, why do we have to list every Tom, Dick, and Harry that you can't be related to? It's already stated there.
As defined by state law.
It's defined by state law.
Just giving you examples.
End of story.
Well,
I don't see how we can accommodate your request without taking away an important part of either a policy one or an ordinance two. To me, that holds no power of enforcement at all. It doesn't make sense.
I interpret that it does.
Well, that kind of lays into my next question, who's gonna enforce it? I mean, I'm going to be the one, making the final decision on who's hired. All right, in every case except for police officers. All right. So, I would be the one enforcing both the personnel policy and the ordinance.
Do you enforce other ordinances?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but I'm going to enforce it on myself, is basically what you're.
Do you comply with other ordinances that you have to enforce?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yes.
So if someone gets through and I don't catch it, then what?
Then I think it's a problem for the policy of the personnel committee. I don't, that is it's a good question, but that's the enforcement of the.
The council is the legislative part of this. The enforcement is up to staff on codes, ordinances, and, resolutions and all that stuff. I can exclude myself from interviews, and then one then I have to go over the interview, and then I can enforce it that way, but, if somebody slips through, where it's in the policy, we have the ability to retroactively go after them. In the ordinance, it's basically, once you're hired, you got one. You got us, you got us. And
This goes back to, again, the point of the ordinance is knowingly hiring someone that is a relative.
That's the point of the ordinance.
That is the point, that is.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing as the point of the policy, if you know you're hiring somebody.
Yeah, we already discussed what the difference of a policy and an ordinance was. And that convinced me that the ordinance is not the best way to go, because I think the ordinance is the best way to go in terms of enforceability.
I mean, the personnel policy also has that clause in there, that, because right now it's social relationships. That was added, I'm gonna say probably 10 or 12 years ago, maybe.
What's a social relationship?
Social,
Is that dating?
a relationship that starts in the office between a manager and a person in influence and an employee, a rank and file. All right, that was added in there. It is completely discouraged, and if something happens out of that situation, both parties can be terminated according to the way that Mr. Miller has that thing written. It has the teeth in it to back it up, and it's what guides us when we hire people. You know, and they get that. They know right off the bat, this is what the situation is. One way or another, it's enforceable, yes. But it's one of those things where we've got to, instead of bringing out the big blue book and handing it to the new employee, we give them the stack of papers that now like this, which is gonna be bigger yet, because I'm looking at updating that at the beginning of the year.
I also think that there's one thing here that we don't publish our personnel policy online. We don't share it with residents. We don't, make it available to the public. One thing we do is we make available our ordinances to the public. And our ordinances are, they reflect what we want in borough government. And do we want an anti-nepotism policy to be the stated public position of this organization and of the culture of this organization? And my opinion is, it should be.
But why do the people outside the borough need to know what our employment policy is?
I think they need to know that they will be fairly considered for employment here.
Well, they will find that out when they came to apply.
So,
Right now, there's no.
this federal law. This isn't federal law. This is, equal employment is federal law. This is important to me. It speaks to good government, it speaks to best management practices, it speaks to transparency in government, and it speaks to how we use taxpayer money to implement policy in this borough. And that is why I believe it should be an ordinance and not just a policy inside a manual that the only people who see it are lawyers and managers.
So the current, policy in the handbook that you're speaking of, does it cover, you said it did not cover every aspect that was covered in this drafted ordinance?
I don't believe it is in this one.
Nepotism is not addressed in the current one.
Well, that's a problem in and of itself, so even at the very end of this conversation, we have to at least address that in and of itself. I mean, in my opinion,
And I don't disagree with that.
yeah.
I think what we're discussing here should be put into the policy, no doubt about that.
I'll just make a motion that we,
You can't make a motion.
this is a finance committee meeting, and I'm
I'm
finance.
sorry, I beg your pardon.
I'll make a motion that the finance committee forwards this for council's consideration. That, it's option number 2.
Gary, I'm looking to you for a second. Because you're the only other member of the finance committee here, unless I can second.
I believe you can second.
Well, then I'll second it. Any further discussion? So the reason that I would second it is so that we can have a vote at the next council meeting and finalize this conversation one way or the other. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
No.
Staff, will please get it on the agenda for next meeting, that'd be great.
Okay. Anything else? Brandon?
Only that the dates of the review of the budget are now set, I believe, starting with the 26th, and what was the second date that we changed?
The second, it was the 29th to the 5th of November.
The 5th?
I'd have to look at my
You made
email.
it November 2nd before the council meeting.
November 2nd before.
November 2nd, yes.
Yep, so
That's like at 5:30, I think.
26th, and then November 2nd.
Yep.
And that was all, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, John, appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, personnel committee, Mr. Whitcomb.
I have, there was a personnel matter, but that'll be in, the, first, executive session, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Property, parks, and recreation, Mrs. Igerton.
We are attempting to schedule a, comprehensive plan meeting with, the rec department, and I will update accordingly next month.
The tree people are gonna be in the park next Monday to start taking the trees down. And that's also the same week that they're supposed to start the roof on the new pavilion.
Any update on the pool renovation?
That's on the agenda for tonight.
And there's, an item there, you need to approve your minutes from.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion. Second.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the vote as unanimous.
Thank you, Mrs. Igerton, appreciate it. Public Works and Safety, Mr. Tomlin?
Well, before I turn the floor over to, our borough manager and the discussion of the leaf collection, I was hoping to arrange a meeting of the, Public Works and Safety Committee in the next month. President Weber, I know you look to us for, a direction to go with our committees, and up to this point, we really haven't had much to offer, partially due to the fact that our committee chairman previously left council. We have a new member of our committee, and now I'd like to have a meeting. We kind of have an idea for a safety initiative. We have one of the members of our committee is a noted educator of youth, and two of our members of our committee deal a lot with safety in our careers, and we were thinking possibly of a safety initiative involving bicycles in town. And the lack of bicycle safety that I've noticed is pretty amazing. I almost got run over on a walk downtown the other day by a couple of young cyclists that didn't yield our passage on the sidewalk. So not only that, but not wearing helmets, kids are not, that are of the right age are
Going the wrong way,
going the wrong way. And I see adults doing it. But we have some ideas that we possibly want to bring forth at a meeting. And also, our room manager mentioned to me earlier about possibly getting together with the property, parks, and recreation, and maybe this could be combined in an effort to look at the creation of, looking at the fire, the location for the new firehouse, basically. I think that the fire company is hoping that we come to some sort of decision on where we want to have the new firehouse, and that's possibly something we can accomplish at the same night. I guess that's acceptable. I don't know if you have to advertise it.
Yeah, we'll have to advertise it as a joint meeting.
Joint meeting, yeah, okay. And possibly other members of council would want to attend that, as that is kind of an important, subject. But, I guess the next thing would be to schedule a meeting, and we want to probably do it tonight for that joint meeting. And it sounds like it's gonna be too long for just something we stick before our next council meeting.
I think it may be. I think you're gonna have Tom Ludwig there, the one that did the report. I think you're gonna have the building committee from the fire company there. The fire chief will be there, and I think they'll all discuss the points of it. And I think that what the fire company, and this comes from some of the meetings that we've had to discuss that report, and before they brought it to council, they would like to get some kind of dialogue going as to what your thoughts, what council's thoughts are on the proposal that was made. If you have a counter proposal as to where you think it may work better, the reasons why, and then they can go into the, I mean, that was an overview of what they did. There was a lot of behind the scenes work that wasn't included in there, that I think that some of the reasons for choosing where they chose, need to be brought to light and discussed. You know, part of the thing that I've done with Chief Neff was to really narrow it down to must-haves, you know, would really need, and then the wants, you know, and then, you know, come to that conclusion. So, and I think they've done that. I think they've shown that on those reports. But I think they're looking for some feedback from council on this too.
May I interject a question? Should we have two separate meetings?
Well, I know, it does sound.
I think the way it sounds, we ought to have two separate meetings, because I was hoping you and, Scott and I was hoping that they have additional people just for our initiative that I spoke about for public works and safety, like the police chief and possibly a bike officer from the department, and get some input from that, so maybe this would be, I don't think you're gonna have the fire company and us in the same meeting.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna wanna do this in front of a council meeting either. I think this is gonna be a lot longer and a lot more in-depth. Like the committee structure should be, you know, the committee would be before they can make a recommendation to the remainder of council. I imagine that, you know, most of the council would attend the meeting anyway, but at least to hear the conversation that goes on. So, it's entirely up to you how you wanna, if you wanna split it apart, if you wanna have two separate meetings to discuss this stuff, or do a special meeting just for the fire company to discuss it.
for my committee and the first thing that I mentioned, maybe we could do that before a council meeting. I mean, the next council, and.
Jim has some ideas, as I understand.
Yeah, he already has some ideas, and, maybe I don't know that we need it. And, you know, we have generally the police chief comes to council meetings, she might be able to attend one that's earlier, starts earlier in the evening, so maybe that could be, done in a meeting just before the next council meeting, whereas this fire station thing was require a migrate time, you know.
Okay.
So can we advertise then for the first thing that the public works and safety meeting just prior to the next council meeting, or do we have something already occurring?
6:30 or 7?
I don't think we'll need a ton of time.
No, I think
Discuss that initiative.
You think you have an hour?
7?
An hour?
An hour for just the things that we're.
yeah, I think just a half an hour.
Okay,
Yeah,
So why don't we do that, advertise for that before the next council meeting?
So that would be October 20th at, 7 p.m.?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, what do you think about, the longer,
Could we do it on an off week, in the evening, because I think it's a lot of information to go over.
and could we do it after the next council?
No.
And not afterwards, but.
Recognizing together.
No, I'm just waiting on the month.
We have a finance committee meeting on the 26th.
Yeah.
Trick or treat is on the 29th.
29th.
Yeah, that's pretty. Well, maybe we should shoot for,
27th, the 7th. You want to do it Tuesday, 27th?
For what?
The 27th? Does that work? Tuesday?
I think it would work.
Okay. And what time did you want to start?
Well, 7, that sounds good.
we'll carve out like 5 hours.
Well, if you start at 7, we'll be done by noon, midnight.
We'll need extra company.
And that'll be a joint meeting?
Well, a joint meeting. It doesn't even need to be necessarily a joint meeting,
Okay, you just want the fire company there, and or Tom and the fire company there. And I have 27th at 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't make it that night, can I ask that it be recorded?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it should be a joint meeting.
What's that?
You think it should? Yeah.
What's that?
I can,
I think it should be a joint meeting.
to get,
Yeah, well, part of both committees' responsibility, really. Who would conduct it?
So then on the weekends,
I'll refer to you.
maybe the finance committee should be part of that too. No, just.
We can take
You're
a
not
look.
rolling it, are you?
Well, if we have council meetings in October, we can.
Well, it's an important topic. It is regardless of whether you do a combined meeting or not, I think you ought to invite whoever wants to come.
And I will remind everyone, council is, that study was paid for out of the fire tax, so in a way, council and the borough paid for that study to be done. And that was done at the order of a previous council, so, I think we need to look at it and see if we have suggestions or problems or foresee any issues coming up with it, so. If you need a copy of it, let me know, I'll get copies back out, to anybody that's.
So for the run this time again, when is this meeting?
The 27th.
27th at 7.
7 o'clock?
Tuesday.
Correct.
Even though it's a joint committee meeting, you might want to advertise that as a
Yep.
council meeting, because I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll all
Absolutely.
be here.
Okay.
And I think that covered what I needed to address, but, obviously we had another subject to consider here.
Actually, what Councilman Whitcomb made mention of, as many of you know, if you read the memo I sent out last Friday, the highway superintendent has announced his retirement date. He is actually using up his vacation time and his sick time. So his last day of work was actually Friday last week. The 27th is when he will officially be retired, of November. So, that leaves us in a tough spot. We've advertised now for, Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, 2.5 months now?
For the highway department.
For highway parks people, and we've gotten 0 applications. So, it's kind of leaving us in a big bind, especially going into this time of year with the leaf stuff, the leaf collection. People ready who we usually get temporary help from, they raised their prices again this year to $27.49 an hour. That's up from $25 last year an hour. So the cost is going up, and I say this every year at budget time. We put 6 people out on the street behind 2 trucks and 4 engines running, and we get 0 value back out of this, other than the fact that it fills up the compost site, collecting leaves. It is a necessary evil. It is a service we provide to the residents of Mechanicsburg at our cost. So, trying to figure out a way to do this in a efficient, money-saving manner. I reached out to one of the people that were here that did a demo with the street sweepers for the authority, because they mentioned that their vacuum machine would do leaves, and there are townships and municipalities that use it for leaves. So I asked them if they would rent us a machine or 2 machines for 2.5 to 3 months, and they said they could do that. The original price for the machines was $11,500 a piece a month. If we rent two of them, they will drop it down to $9,000 a month. But if you look at the spreadsheets I provided, the first one that's green and gray, those are estimated costs of what it's going to cost this year to do it. The fuel numbers are based on what was used last year at this year's price. And based on the vacation schedule and stuff that was provided to me by the exiting superintendent, we're going to need about 1,500 man-hours of people-ready time, which, as you can see, that's $41,000 we'll be spending on temporary help for the Borough of Mechanicsburg just to pick up leaves. The grand total on this whole thing, $104,000 to clean up leaves is much more than what we usually spend. Usually we're in around the $75,000, $80,000, $90,000 range, but the extra manpower this year is going to really hurt that. So what I did is I worked up a sheet where we could get two machines or one machine. Both options are on here, and it cuts the cost almost by, almost $1 is what it cuts cost on that to do the leaf cleanup. If we go with one machine, it drops it almost $60,000 is what we'll be saving if we do it with just one machine and one driver. So they can have the machine here to start leaf cleanup. They'll do 2 days of training with the drivers, whoever we choose to go on it. Right now, probably the compost person would be the one that drives the machine. He has experience driving it. He's the one that drove it when they were here and did the 2-day demo with it. It's not quite as big as what our trucks are, but it packs the leaves in. And I have a video if anybody wants to watch it of what it looks like. I know Councilman Anthony asked for the video links. I sent them to him. It's going to take a little longer, but this is a very costly service that we do every year, and this is one of the ways to cut costs and try to get it down. So I'm asking for at least to be able to rent one of the machines and start leaf cleanup next week with just one machine. This is also going to free up the highway guys to finish a project that was supposed to have been finished in August. Actually, August and September is when it was supposed to be finished up, and that's the natural playground. For anybody that's not familiar, that was a grant we received. EAC worked to get that grant put through for the natural playground in Kosher Park. We've had extension after extension after extension on that. COVID played havoc with it. Our work schedule for the guys through the spring and the beginning of the summer really played havoc with trying to get the work done. I spent a day at the sewer plant cutting it pieces to put together so that they can take them out and just put them in. And it's not getting done. We have to have it done by the end of this year or we lose the grant. The materials are all at the sewer plant. It's ready to go. It's just a matter of getting the guys out there to do it. So this will free up the entire highway department to go out there and work.
Which is how many people?
What's that?
How many people?
There'll be 4 at the highway garage. Yep. So
Not counting the driver from the machine?
no, he's coming. If we do this if we do this with one machine, I'm going to pull the compost person. He's also the MS4 coordinator for the authority, but I'm going to pull the MS4 for the compost person because he's going to be the one actually working at the compost site, moving the leaves around, moving the stuff around, and stuff like that. So it'll free up the entire highway department to work at the national playground.
Robert, how many men are included in your people-ready labor hours?
It depends. We did it based on what it would be, how many hours we would have the people out here. Some days it's 2, some days it's 4. The problem with having, and I mentioned this in the memo, our insurance company will not let us send a crew out with with basically a temp crew driving our equipment. And that, I would would not be comfortable doing that either.
And you have usually 2 trucks, is that
We
right?
run 2 trucks all the time.
So then that's 2 borough employees for you to do that,
I would need a minimum of 2 borough employees to do that.
okay. Other than People Ready, are there any other, agencies that do that kind of?
I was on the phone Friday morning, all morning, calling every temporary agency in the area, and all of their phones were ringing busy. The one that I did get through to doesn't do labor, they do white collar administration and clerical. I've talked to a couple other officers, a lot of people are having trouble hiring right now. It seems like there's a depletion in people looking for jobs. I'm not sure if that's because children are not back in school full time. So many people who maybe would be looking are holding back because they're home and without childcare. But these places, the phones just ring off the hook and nobody even answers them.
It's difficult right now to get people to work.
Yeah,
And a lot of
it's
that is
I talked to,
commitment of
a
time.
local electric contractor who's had advertisements out for a year and a half
Yeah.
and has not had one person. And I think you're in the same boat, Glenda and Roger, correct me if I'm wrong.
Two and a half months.
No response to any of the ads you've put out.
Well, now we have, since we hit the one for, the highway superintendent's replacement, we've gotten 4.
Oh, good.
But all of them are actually 5.
Only one I think is really qualified
Yeah,
for the
but that's just it, they have management experience, but they don't have the experience we need running the highway crew, so, but it's a higher paying job, they know that, it comes with the manager title, so, but as far as the labor goes, we're getting nothing, I mean, you advertised for 6 months for a part-time person at the front desk, and we had 2 applications in an entire 6 months.
Called and canceled her interview because she wants to be home with her kids.
Being a
Because she
manager,
thinks they're not gonna be in school. So I advertised in the Patriot News for the 2 jobs, the highway job and the part-time clerical. Got 2 applicants after advertising for 14 days on town line. That's Monday through Friday during the day. 2 applicants. One of them canceled. I scheduled them both to come in for interviews because they both seemed to have adequate qualifications for the job. And one lady canceled the night before the interview, so I did start the lady who came in for the interview this week.
One thing about it, if you get a guy that's gonna be on the road crew as management, he's not gonna wanna do like Craig did. He is not gonna do the work.
Well, that's not gonna be an option.
I know, okay.
did you try advertising in, like any municipal magazines?
Yeah, I haven't called. I didn't put it in PSAB because their lag time is so great. You know, you have to have it in a month and a half before it runs that far behind. Even when we tried to advertise for managers there, we find that lots of times it don't fit into our. And that's really what they more or less do. We could do Craig's in there.
Yeah.
But we have gotten that, some response to his, and it's
I
only.
think the highway superintendent position would be great to put in
Yeah,
as professional type magazines, where, you get more of a different crowd.
I have it on the call. I've had the highway job on the call.
My other question, and it says in your memo that you'll be down to 1 person.
There are days,
Days will be down to 1 person, do you know how many days that'll be?
I think there's like 3 days on the schedule, at the end of October, early November. And then the other one is at the end of November during hunting season.
You got somebody going out for an operation or something?
Yes, yeah, he's actually out the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Because so of the people you're assigning to drive the 2 new machines, is there a period of time that if we get 2 machines, that one would sit because your driver is out?
There's a possibility, but that's I have laborers at the sewer plant that I could also pull if we needed to. This time of year, without the sun being as strong as what it is, there's not as much wash down to do and a few other things that we could pull them off. But, And to be honest with you, I added, and if you look on there, the orange on the blue, on the one with the blue on it and the gray, I went back through there this morning and I added in a single machine with a single driver. I was out the other day actually looking where the street sweeper was running and just driving around looking for code stuff and a few other things. And I noticed that people were starting to put leaves out, but it's very sporadic. But they're putting out decent piles, and this machine will chew those leaves up, no problem. So usually at the beginning of the leaf season, they are only working 4, 5, 6 hours. And then, you know, as it goes on, and usually right after the first frost, that's when all the leaves drop, except for the oak trees. And that's when it gets heavy. I didn't speak to Northeast Sweeper about the fact that, if we need a second machine later on, would they honor the $9,000 price, but right now I'm kind of leaning towards the single machine for at this point in time. That will give me that extra guy that I need if I needed to put him in the machine instead of having, the primary in it.
Will one machine be adequate, do you think?
It's gonna, I think, if they stay ahead of it, yes.
Okay.
I think one machine would be fine. The problem with doing it the way we do it now, we always have, one of the blowers breaks down. They're manufacturing parts for it because they don't make them anymore. They're old, they're older machines. And they see that they sit almost all season except for the 2 months that we use them, 2 or 3 months we use them. Last year we had that snow in early November, I believe, and so they had to tear down all the trucks, put the snow plows on. Then, as soon as the snow went away, because the weather turned decent, they had to spend another day turning them back into leaf machines. So, in this way, we can at least have, if we do get an early snow, because, what was it, 4 years ago, we had the snow for Halloween, you know, we can be prepared, and we can get out there and do something with it. And then right away we get the leaf machine back out. So I'm kind of leaning towards the single machine.
Roger, how much money did we get for the street sweeper machine we did have?
$35,000.
Roger, just that thing, I know that's this third brush weed cutter thing, is that what's gonna be able to make it, able to get the, I mean, I see 3 and 4 foot piles of leaves, and I'm looking at this machine, and I'm thinking, how is that gonna do, I mean, I think it had to say a lot with.
Sorry, I didn't realize the volume was on. This is actually the machine, that's the third brush. Now, we're gonna get it without the weed cutter. The weed cutter is the one you have in the street sweeper configuration. And so you use that thing to cut the weeds down.
That's the weed cutter, that?
Yeah, that brush out front, that is, we won't have that. We'll have that, but it'll have a standard brush on it. It's not gonna have the weed cutter.
Okay.
Roger, so how are we gonna use this machine with 2 cars parked on the street and leaf piles in the middle?
Pretty much the same way we do it now. They'll get it as best they can and go from there. I mean, right now, we're sending the guy out with the leaf blower, and he's trying to blow the leaves out, and when they're wet like that, the leaf blower's not doing anything. So, you know, I mean.
So it'll take more than one man to operate
This thing? No.
But if there's leaves that need to be blown out, then they're gonna have to shut it
Then
down.
they have to go back around and get them after the car's moved. We do send out notices and tell them not to park on top of leaf piles and so on and so forth. This has been cleaning out a gutter. But yeah, that's a pretty light load there. But if you look, this is when they dump it. Is that out of that machine? That is out of that machine, okay. there's a little bit of.
So once that gets filled up, we'll have to go up to the sewer plant and something, okay?
There's a little bit of cursing in there, so I should have unmuted it.
A little bit of what?
There was a little bit of cursing in there, so I'm muted. But this is how it packs that stuff in there. I don't know how long, when I talked to the guy that you see that's gonna jump on top of this pile, he was actually here to demonstrate the first machine. And I asked him how many, he said that was probably about 3/4 of a mile of leaves that they picked up. And that's how packed tight that stuff was when it came out of there. And then this is him cleaning it off. The guy that's running the hose right there is actually part owner of the company. But,
So Roger, would you, use Nextdoor or other social media to advertise to get them?
well, we have our leaf routes, and we'll run the leaf routes. They're run similar to the trash routes. So we're gonna run the leaf routes the same way, and people know what those are. And we have that map out on the website also.
So, I know you mentioned, and you touched on the idea that we need to have that natural playground done before the end of the year. So the highway guys that won't be doing leaves, if we rent these, you said they're gonna be doing work over there, so.
Yep.
What's the nature of the work that they're gonna be doing? Because I know sometimes, like, when we get into this leaf fall and whatnot, the ground gets pretty hard and it's hard to dig and stuff like that, so. I mean, it's a related topic, because I don't wanna have them be off leaf duty and then they're just sitting there.
Now, we have, and this is a small bridge. Ours is a little different than the one here, but because of the rock that's over there, we come up with an idea over there to put a bridge in as a amenity instead of the pergola that they had up, because they had 6x6s, 12 feet long, sticking up in the air, and we could only get in the ground about 1.5 feet because of the rock. So we developed a bridge that will actually sit on top using the same materials. This is the pieces I was out of the sewer plant, I cut all the pieces to put this together with. So this is one of the things that we're working on. The other one is the benches and stuff for the outdoor classroom. So those have to be put in the ground. We have a post hole digger on a tractor that we bought for the park last year, that they can, do it down. And if they have to, they can scrape it with the bucket and, do a trench and set the posts in for the benches. So this one is just, the way I designed the bridge is designed to sit on top of the ground with minimal burial. So, and it's heavy. Once it's all bolted together, it's all made out of 6x6s. So it's gonna be extremely heavy to anybody try to pick up and move.
Roger, what was the estimated time of putting that stuff together at the National Playground? Do you have an idea of how many hours?
If I can get all 4 guys out at the highway out there, I should be able to have it done by the end of the month.
Okay, so before the freeze.
These guys, they have carpentry skills. They don't have some of the plan reading ability that some of us others have, but, so they're gonna be a little bit of guide. That's why I was cutting the pieces for that bridge.
Dr. when did we get the grant for that? When were we awarded that?
It's been almost 5 years, because we got awarded the grant in April, and in May, the school district canceled our lease on the ground after we got the grant. It took about 4 months to work that out, and then as soon as that was done, they started construction, and they used that for staging area would be the best word for their construction, so we couldn't do anything because they had all their construction vehicles staged there, so we had to wait for all that construction to get done, which finished up last fall late. So we planned on doing it the spring of this year, but then with COVID, we had only half the staff here on any given day, so even though we did assign it to the Parks Department, they failed to finish the project due to the restricted hours.
Okay. And so it was always in the plan to have the borough police do it?
That's part of our match, is the labor. We get credit for the labor cost as a non-tax
have another question too,
Sure.
about, as far as leaf pickup goes, I know, like, ideally it's more convenient to just throw your leaves in the street and get them to go away and whatnot, but like, for like a future plan, is there any way to like, I don't know, like encourage, or is there any sort of way to take your leaves and put them in bags and have them transported, like instead of trying to rent a machine and stuff like that?
Or leave your leaves on the ground, because it's actually better for the environment. We could do a whole town hall series about
I
environment.
will use experience from the glorious city of Harrisburg on that. They tried to tell their residents in the uptown areas that they were not gonna pick up leaves anymore unless they were in bags, and they pretty much ran them out of town. I would love to stop. It's an expense, period, and we get nothing out of it. However, I also have no trees in my yard, so it doesn't affect me as it does, other people.
I know people love it,
Yes,
and they ask about it, and it's not done.
exactly.
So, two questions for you. These are our first date for these collections?
Next week. That's why part of my spiel tonight would be to request that the committee recommend that council, if they're in favor of this, the committee recommend that council add it to the agenda tonight to approve at least one street sweeper.
We need to do it, because the storm drains get clogged with the leaves, and then that's flooding.
That was my other question, so we're paying to have our street sweep, is it by the same company that, so it's a different company? Is there any way, like, are the street sweepers that we pay for already, are they capable of doing something like this?
No.
Probably not.
No, the Regen Air machine they're using, yeah. The Regen Air machine that they're using will not, it won't pick up the leaves like this. This one, the machine that you saw on there is just pure vacuum machine. Those brushes kick it to the middle where the vacuum hose is. It's basically a giant Roomba that somebody drives, is what this thing is.
That is a while, I know, the other suggestion I have for more longer term planning, when we have more time to look into this, would be some sort of intermunicipal government sort of collaboration where we have township possibly pick up our leads. Because we already have the services.
Yes, we talked to Silver Spring last year about helping us out when our leaf machine went down, and Craig was worried about the other one. The problem we have with that is their machine is so much taller because of it being a township. They can't get under some of the trees that we have here. And that creates a problem. That's kind of why also I looked at this machine, because it's shorter even than the street sweeper that Riley's using on the streets.
They won't give up their help because there's no release too, so they won't give up any of their help.
I'm looking at you, Mr. Hellman. Is there a motion to add this to tonight's action item?
I would, for discussion and possible action in regards to, the rental of the, street sweeper for leaf cleanup.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
Anything else from the committee workshop, I hate to ask. Yeah. All right, the committee portion of this evening's meeting is Mechanicsburg Borough Council meeting of October 6th, 2020 to order. We will begin with the pledge to the flag followed by a moment of silence. I I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Roll call.
President Weber?
Here.
Vice President Miller?
Here.
Councilwoman Anderson?
Present.
Councilman Anthony?
Present.
Councilman Blucher?
Here.
Councilman Tillman?
Here.
Councilman Whitcomb?
Here.
Mayor Ritter?
Here.
Solicitor Lisa Cohen?
Here.
Solicitor Robert Cohen?
Here.
Engineer Rogalski?
Here.
Manager Suzuki?
Here.
Assistant Manager Boyer? Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Are there any guests? Hearing none and seeing none, we'll move on to citizens' comments or requests. Do we have any? Hearing none and seeing none, we'll go on to correspondence. Mr. Suzuki, do you have something?
Yeah, there's just one, everyone can see, I think it was included in the packet.
Yeah.
It's for McNeese, Wallace, and Nurick, the attorneys for Legacy Park. They were just notifying us of their intended schedule and the phases, for Legacy Park. The next phase to come in for approval will be phase 4. So we'll be seeing that one, they have 2023, actually, no, I'm sorry, phase 7, May 1st of 2022. So that's actually towards the back, in what some refer to as Peppermill Point, but, it's the 55 plus section. So.
Thank you.
There's a story behind that name.
I know, I'm sure there is. We'll move on for now. Okay, we need approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of council of September 15, 2020.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Common seconds. Is there any discussion?
I just have one suggestion, is that I think they're missing in the minutes the reference to the third tree contractor that you did.
Oh, yes, that has to be added.
That should be added. And the name of it, is it Lent?
It was
Nothing like responded.
LinkedIn Response.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that was the third one.
That was the third one, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that catch, Mr. Miller.
Do we need to revise our?
No, we just accept the minutes, the motions with the adjustment that Mr. Miller just mentioned. Mr. Martin?
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the vote as unanimous.
Thank you. Engineering report.
Mr. President, the only item that I need to refer was approval, and there's no agenda item for that, we plan on doing that.
I think we'll wait till we get there.
That's good.
Thank you. Community liaison reports. Downtown partnership?
We continue to meet, I have no current updates.
No current update. Okay, thank you. Mr. Feldman?
Okay, continuing the tradition of money-making efforts for the library, JoJo's, well, let me first tell you that, they just ended their online auction, and if you took the time to look at some of the great things they had for sale, you could understand why, but, according to the library, they were very successful with that. That just ended on Sunday. Or it wasn't Saturday, Sunday, yeah. So, if you missed out on that, that's a shame, because there was some really nice stuff on there. There is a dine out that benefits the library this month, Wednesday, October 14th at JoJo's. So you don't have to travel far to go to that one. It's, again, Wednesday, October 14th, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. 15% of the cost of your meal will go to the library. You must have a flyer, as with all these dine-out events, and you can get one you can print it off online or pick one up at the library. And there are 2 JoJo's locations, and they will honor your flyer at both of them if you bring it with you.
Will they honor them for takeouts as well as eating in?
That I'm not sure.
Yes. Thank you. That's important because a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Eat in.
Yeah, so that last dino at, where was it, Outback? Yeah, that was total takeout, and I participated, that was very interesting, there was a nice line of people waiting for food outside, so that probably was beneficial too. There is a book sale in October 23rd to October 25th. As always, they have a members preview on October 23rd from 6 to 8. The book sale itself is Saturday the 24th from 9 to 2, and the bag sale for all that's left is Sunday the 25th from 1 to 3. And and that's at their 114 North York Street address, the sale. And they're asking that no donations be made to the book sale till after, because they're so filled up with donated books.
Let me add something to that book sale. Please keep in mind, the number of people will be restricted to go in the building at one time. So if you see lines, there probably are going to be lines. And contrary to what I heard on the news tonight, that they were permitted to have 25 people in there, which 4 helpers and 21 people. By what I saw in Wolf's new guidelines, they'll be allowed 20 people. So, contrary to, yes, the upper end has more people can participate, but the lower end dropped from 25 people to 20%. 20% of 100 is 20. I'm just saying you're liable to see long lines.
And they keep changing the regulations. Thank you for that, that will be important, As always, the library has all kinds of programs for all ages, and if you get an opportunity, take a look at their website, you can see what's coming up. Some of them are things that you can actually go in the library, participate in, some of them are by Zoom, and as a matter of fact, their trivia contest for the month of October, which is Saturday, October 24th, from 6 to 8, is via Zoom and not an in-person trivia contest. But the subject is scary movies. And again, it's Saturday, October 24th, 6 to 8, and they have a 25 people limit. That doesn't mean that that means like 25 teams of people can participate. But 25 people can enter the Zoom at one time and participate in that trivia contest. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Museum Association, just a quick update. We're moving along with the gardens project. Electricity and plumbing should be done in the next 2 weeks, as well as some of the landscaping. And so we hope to see some grass growing before winter. I'll leave it at that. Downtown Program Service Manager, Rebecca.
Good evening, everyone. You all have a copy of my report. A lot of things under About Face this month. We finally have all the bids in place and have secured contractors for the work at Smoke and Pickles, that building. This is an About Face grant to the building owner, the new building owner, and a Cumberland Street View grant. All told $11,500 for that part of the project. There were earlier grants for the earlier parts of the project, including the signing and the lighting and so forth. Smoke and Pickles also received one of the County CARES Act Renew grants for $34,000, and they're using a large portion of that to create an outdoor dining deck with tables and chairs, seating for an additional 20 guests. We approved a grant for Blitz Soap Company. They have moved to 1 East Main Street. That's the former Pullman's hot dog shop.
Jimmy Bowman.
Yeah, hot dog shop. Looking a lot better these days. And part of that grant was for signage, but the other part was should they decide to change the light fixtures. They're interested in doing that, and we encouraged them to do that and provided the funding to do that. I know Chrissy Dixon was not so shabby at 226 East Main Street. She owns one of the original log homes and has peeled back the aluminum siding over some clapboard to expose the logs on the front first floor. She's interested in getting that chinking it, putting the mortar stuff in the crack. It's kind of interesting when you see it, because where there was mortar that they pulled out, and in other places you'll just see stacks of logs, sections, pieces, like shims, in between, with stuffing of sorts. So that's what they're gonna do. She's interested in a new door, a new transom over the door, replacing the concrete steps with wooden steps and a new railing. So that'll be a nice project. And I'm working with Pinky, who, she and her husband own I don't know how to pronounce her last name, and I've asked her, and I don't always get the same pronunciation. So Pinky, she owns the building that has Subway in it, has Fantastic, and the Main Street Laundry. We're getting estimates to have that building painted.
Bill Murphy's buying it then.
Correct?
I don't know, that predates me.
I just thought I'd throw that out.
All right. Delicia's moving along. They have had some delays with their equipment, and that's COVID related. Everybody's having trouble getting those kind of things in. We are working on their signage. It will be a little different than we originally proposed. It's just not going to be able to, because of the different elevations on the building, that arch that's over the double doors wouldn't work for the halo. So we're going to put the signage within the arch. It'll kind of straddle the arch out to the side. I've been keeping the borough up to date on what that's looking like in case there were any tweaking that we needed to do, and in fact, we did tweak it a little bit. So that'll be at the hard meeting in November. And what's the date on that? Because it normally would be now, what is now the council meeting?
It could be upstairs, or they could move it. I'd have to find out what they,
but it would be that
talked
night?
about it last night.
Okay, all right. So another night when I'll be 2 or 3 places at the same time. Sheila Kaufman, you may remember Sheila Kaufman. She had the business called Sheila Frank, and she is a bridal gown designer and formal wear designer. She is coming back and expects to open in that very same location where she was at 50 West Main toward the end of the year. She does some custom pieces, but the bulk of her work now is in collections. She just introduced a new collection last week. You can go in and select the design, and then she will customize it to you. So that's very exciting. The Queen Anne style building owned by the former Washington Fire Company at 55 East Main Street is under contract, and my understanding is, and I have no announcement as to who, that's not my announcement to make, is purchasing it, but it would remain the 3 rental properties. The county's blight fee went into effect October 1st, so now we're collecting monies to be used to remediate blight across Cumberland County. And I'm meeting with the president of the Mechanicsburg Chamber of Commerce, Melissa Heiler, next week to talk about some interesting projects we might have in mind. That's what I have. Anything for me?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your efforts. Thank you. Are there any additions to the agenda?
I have one addition to the agenda, sir, that is add discussion and possible action to accept the agreement with Upstate Sweepers and Rentals for lease machine rentals.
Okay, we will need a motion to add that.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Atherton.
I'll second.
And thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. Is there any discussion?
I just have a question. Did we want to also add, I think there was some email traffic between us about adding for the E-code to have the solicitor review it?
Yeah, we can add that. I sent it over to her today. She can review it. I mean.
Okay, so we don't need to take an additional time.
No.
You're good?
Yep.
Okay, Mrs. Martin?
Unless I hear a negative response, I will report the vote as unanimous.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. We'll need a motion, please.
Motion.
Mr. Whitcomb makes the motion, a second.
I'll second.
Mrs. Atherton? Any discussion? Mrs. Martin?
Unless I hear a negative response, I will report the vote as unanimous.
Thank you very much. Action items before council, Mr. Szewski.
The action items before council on October 6th, 2020. Discussion possible action to accept the time extension of 180 days offered by Peter Consultants Incorporated for the Summit Market Land Development Plan of 2018. And I will defer to Mr. Regalski on this one.
We did have a quasi-productive meeting, the first in quite a while. It's probably been a month or so ago now, I think. There's been a fraction of movement in that month since, but still very, very slow. You know, we've made some recommendations to the developer about reducing their footprint and some other things like that. And, you know, while they've kind of indicated they'd consider that, we're we're still not getting any formal response back from them at this point. So, you know, we've been kind of messing around with this for several years now, starts and stops, and certainly COVID didn't help, but at the same time, you know, it doesn't seem like we're gaining a whole lot of traction. I think at some point in the past, we kind of issued an ultimatum to say, hey, come back to us within 180 days, or we're not gonna consider another extension. I think we're to that point, frankly. Roger, if you agree to that too, I mean.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of reluctance on his part to change the stuff. I will tell council that the extension runs out, next Tuesday, the 13th. So if you decide not to accept this, you will have to deny the plan tonight. That's the municipal planning code, so rules on that one. Greg, I'll let you go from there.
So I would suggest, that motion really, that you grant the 180-day extension, and that there be, some additional language, and that can even be in a response letter, that hey, heads up, we're not gonna consider another extension. So you have 180 days, that's 6 more months to get things worked out with PennDOT and, get a plan back into us. And even if we see some type of response, or see some type of forward progress, we can reconsider that position, I guess. But it just seems like we're not going anywhere with it. So
when we deny their plan, if we take that route at a future meeting, they can come back, they can resubmit.
Sure, absolutely. We're not reducing any of their rights, I'll say, it's just that they would have to pay the application fee and go through the process.
Right.
I will say, if we're gonna deny the plan, it would probably behoove us to have a very structured motion to do so, and identify the previous review letters, and we're probably not prepared necessarily to do that tonight, so, but,
it's just been stretched out for so long.
Yeah.
This is their second submission on this same plot. We did deny it once before.
And last time when we agreed to extend it 180 days, I do believe the discussion was that we were not going to give another extension, so.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering,
Actually, I think that was discussion at every one of the.
Could we fashion the motion to indicate that if we give the 180-day extension, that there is strong language in the letter as suggested by the engineer, that this is your last chance, so to speak, something of that nature. Worded much more eloquently than that, I would hope.
Yeah. I would make a motion that we give them the 180-day extension with the necessary language to get to the point that is the last one.
I'll second that.
All right, very good. Thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Martin?
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the vote as unanimous.
Thank you very much. Next item.
Discussion possible action on the additional work proposed for RJR Engineering under contract 2020-01 for the Memorial Park swimming pool renovation.
Mr. President, so what happened here is that we approached RJR, they were the apparent bidder for the pool project, as a normal process, sent them the contract documents to execute them, et cetera, to get the bonding together. And I got a frantic phone call from them saying, hey, we're unsure about our plaster number, okay? And if you'll recall, we had a new working contract. The contract was about $128,000. Of that $128,000, roughly 60-some of that was the plaster pool. If you take a look at the bid tabulation, all the other bidders were at least twice, if not 3 times that amount for the plastering. So that wasn't, I guess, a complete surprise to me that maybe this guy, kind of missed something. So then, he did admit he was not at the pre-bid meeting, we had one bidder at the pre-bid meeting, that person did not bid. They did not do a field view of the pool, okay? So, what ended up happening is, we had a meeting, we came out, he brought his plasterer out, we had a very long discussion about, the current condition of the pool. He indicated he had made an assumption that the pool was just concrete, which is a little, whatever. But I'll be honest with you, we should have done a better job in our spec. We basically, in our spec, said any prep work that's associated with pool, thinking it would just be the joints, would be an additional cost. So, to the extent our spec did not define what, that prep should be. So, we had our meeting, The plaster basically said all the paint that's on the pool needs to come off, because it's been painted over and over and over the years. So, they provided, to start the conversation, a price to remove the paint, sandblast it down to bare concrete to apply the plaster. They also wanted the plaster pool react differently than a painted pool, so there's a little bit more attention that needs to be paid to water chemistry. There's a requirement to have the pool covered and water in the pool, because as soon as the plaster gets dry or dry for a long period of time, that's when you have issues with the plaster. So some of the conversations we were having, we originally intended to have the plaster come up and then roll over into the gutter, for example. That during the season is fine, but over the wintertime, for example, if we kept the cover on, we'd have to make sure that that was covered in water and some other things like that. We do not have interior depth markers in our pool, which is a current requirement, so there was discussion about whether or not we would want to add tile around the edge that would contain those markers. And the plaster itself is almost, half an inch thick when it's done, so there would be some type of termination that would need to be considered, depending on how we play that out. So the bottom line is this: if you propose, there's a letter in your packet, you propose a number of different recommendations as to if you would like to move forward with the plastering, how we would address that, in terms of additional cost to the contract. The joints certainly need to be done, to be honest, we've been over the summer without water in it, we have grass and stuff going on some of the joints, and I mean, it's a little crazy that we normally wouldn't have because the pool's been sitting there without water in it, so that would certainly need to be something, regardless of whether we do plaster or not, there'd still be, probably, $5,000 to $6,000 worth of joint work that needs to be cleaned out, recaulked, and all those things. And from what I understand, it hasn't been done in a couple of years, so that's not a complete surprise, that kind of maintenance would need to be done as well, so. But if we want to stick with the plaster approach, at the very minimum, we have to remove that interior painted surface, and they're providing a cost of $44,470. As I mentioned, there's the joints that would need to be done, which we're estimating at about, it's a linear foot price, but we think it's going to be about $6,000. So that would be an additional $50,470 to be able to do the plaster. Then he goes on to provide some of the other, recommendations for tile and some other things like that, to do everything. So when you add all that up, it's almost triple the cost of the original plaster. And it's actually more in line with what the other guys did. So my hunch is that the other guys that did the job, included some of these things in their price, even though it wasn't necessarily called out to be that way. So, I think there's really, two questions. One is if option one is to I guess, rescind the ad alternate, which is the plastering, and just stick with the raising of the deep end as part of the base bid. Option two would be to make a motion to proceed with all or a portion of these additional costs. And then, option three would be there's been no contract executed at this point, I believe, so we could reject all the bids at this point, since there's been no contract signed. We'd have to look into that scenario.
It's also true in their comments that they said that if they went with plastering, it's recommended that you also do cover.
Definitely, that was, he said that we have to have water in the pool all the time for the plaster to really maintain its lifespan, of what's expected. So that the whole point of the plaster is to give you a little bit more than, that we were talking in that 7 to 10 year range, before it would need to be, a little maintenance on it, versus having to paint the pool every year. But that warning that was thrown out there was, not only do you have to have the water in it, the water's got to have the right water chemistry to not basically eat the plaster off the pool or stain it. He said he's certainly seen a lot of the plaster, has a lot of concerns about in a public pool that it just doesn't, the look isn't there. You're going to get a lot of, it's going to look white, but it's also going to look very dirty in spots and things like that. That can be an issue with that particular scenario, especially when the water is not as deep like a pool, where we have that zero entry portion of the pool.
I believe, if my memory serves, when we accepted the initial bid, we had talked about adding covers, but waiting till the season was over, because there would be water in the pool during the season.
Right.
That we would have to do this in next year's budget. But now,
So, well, the plaster, if we do the plaster still will not be completed until April of next year. It will be done right before we fill the pool, before the season. And then essentially what happens, once you plaster, there's a process, because the plaster actually starts, you have to like brush it and, clean it like multiple times. So there's a whole month's worth of prep, once we get the water in there to get it cleaned up for the first time. So, we would not do the plaster now. They would continue to do the concrete work now. There's plenty of time left in the season to do that. This calendar year, and then in 2021, we would do the plaster.
Greg, approximately how much would it cost to paint the pool? After it's done, like, do you know what the ballpark figure would be?
A couple $1,000 for the paint that was wet. I think we were painting, right, Ron?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Labor, there is tremendous difference, I mean.
So just my thinking is like, what's the cost benefit here? How long will it take us to recoup the cost of doing this if we just paint the pool every,
These numbers here, it's gonna take a lot longer. I think the biggest savings from a safety standpoint and a time-consuming standpoint is raising the deep end, doing away with the diving well.
Absolutely think we have to do that, but I at this cost, I don't know if I see the cost benefit of doing the process.
I agree, I completely agree.
It seems to me that if we do the plastering, that means the water has to be a certain pH, and, we have to have, that would be constant, somebody constantly watching that.
At least once a week, someone would have no one swimming in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Another option was that they can go out and have to get a price for this, we don't have to make this decision tonight, but if we didn't go with the plaster, there was an epoxy paint that is, kind of in between. It wouldn't be as much as the plaster clearly, but it would be more than what we paint now. But my fear is you still have to strip probably the paint that's on the wall.
I would start to sandblast.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have to do that sooner or later anyway, because we're gonna have to search leaks.
We're starting to get to the point that, you got, whatever it's been, I don't know, not 50 years, but 10. You got a lot of paint on there, and you can see,
It's 10 or 12 years.
So what would the cost be to sandblast the paint and not do that? Because I think that's something that we need to look at.
So that $44,000 we talked about, that's the cost to sandblast it, okay? So that would be the $44,470.
Just the sandblast.
Just the sandblast, yeah.
Okay.
I do not know what the cost, obviously a couple thousand, we could certainly just paint it as we have, or.
So if we don't sandblast it, are we still having potential leaks that we're looking for?
Yeah.
So how much money are we losing every season with leaks?
We're going through probably 4,000 to 6,000 gallons a day.
And how much money is that
I-
to?
$69,000 approximately for water, or $6,900.
A month,
No, a year.
a year.
That's 3 months.
Okay, 3 months.
Well, it's really we track it all year because they don't usually drain the whole pool in the spring, so we track the use, they shut the water off during the cold.
I would like to, I agree with Greg. I think we rescind the all bid that we had on this. We can look at something after they get done, because we're gonna have to prime the new concrete and stuff like that that's in there. That's gonna have to be prepped before you paint it in the spring. You gotta have the right temperature to do all that stuff. So we'll have some time here to figure out what we wanna do with the rest of the pool. I'd like to investigate.
If we just paint that, rather than deal with the pH of the water 12 months a year.
Well, I'd like to look at the epoxy stuff that.
Yeah, I think that.
It sounds like we need to rescind this bid, and we need to rebid, because I think we wanna take a look at what that price is for other people, sandblasting and also epoxy, compare the price of.
And let me express a concern that we are now at the end of the pool season, we close the pool with no repairs that will be done this pool season?
Well, what I would recommend is this, is you continue with the award of this kind. This guy is certainly lower than all the other ones, okay? So, at his base bid. So you continue to do you do the base bid work this fall. We go to a coatings guy who specializes in this, who's not gonna be marked up by this guy, and we would bid that package for the spring and have him ready to go come April, and be ready to whenever he wants to come in,
So the joint work will be done, those things will be done, because that, I think we need to.
The heavy structure, just the coating would be.
Okay, so,
Was the sandblasting in the bid spec?
It is not, no.
we said we would pay extra for it, so.
On note two, if we end up doing the plaster, I know in the letter it said something about, acid washing, and I know, do we currently acid wash our pool every year?
Yes. Well, we're doing it every other year.
Okay, so it'd be an expense that we.
Yeah, because that right there is $15,000 to do that.
And sometimes we have to do it. We
Yeah.
need to do
And
it.
acid washing does rust the pool.
It roughs up the surface, takes the scum off the walls.
Takes paint off, or that's separate, little bit.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask the solicitor to help us redo this motion, because it's gonna be a little
Well, I'm
convoluted.
not really sure what we want to do on that. You
I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah,
Why put you on the spot?
that's what I'm listening
So
to.
we wanna do the base bid, is that correct?
So we made a previous motion to award the base bid and the ad alternate, okay? Because no contract has been executed, I don't see any reason why we couldn't just award the base bid in the amount of $66,700 to RJR Engineering, just like we did before, so we'll be modifying that previous motion, and we proceed with that contract.
Which does not include the sandblasting.
That does not include the sandblasting, it only includes the building of defense.
So we have to make an additional motion to.
What we would have to do is put out another bid for the additional work.
Yeah, two would be to do a separate bid.
Don't need a motion for it at this point.
No, we need a motion.
To make a motion.
All we need to do is revise that motion to allow him to do what we,
The base bid.
the base bid.
So we're the base bid, yeah.
Okay, so we need a motion to accept the base bid.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All right. I hope you're getting the language down. Is there any other discussion on this?
I'd just like to know how much it would cost to fill it in.
A lot less.
You don't want to be run out of town.
Yeah, I'll do that, I'm gonna say that in my text. I'm saying it so loud, it's recording.
All right, hearing no further discussion, Mrs. Martin.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will report the vote as unanimous.
Thank you. Next item.
Discussion possible action on the special event application for Mechanicsburg Chamber of Commerce for Streets and Treats on October 17th, 2020, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This does include Mr. Palm requested if he could use Railroad Avenue, since it's already barricaded off for 4 or 5 vendors.
So moved.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by, Mr. Anthony and seconded by Mrs. Zargarton. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Martin.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will report the vote as unanimous.
Thank you, and the motion carries. Next item.
Discussion possible action to approve expenditures from all funds for the period beginning September 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2020, as listed below.
You guys have anything after that? You forgot something?
Yeah, I'll add that.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry. I'll make that motion.
Mr. Whitcomb?
I'll second.
Mr. Pellman seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Martin?
Unless I hear a negative response, I will report the vote as unanimous.
Thank you, and the motion carries. Next item.
Discussion possible action to accept the agreement with Upstate Sweepers and Rentals for leaf machine rentals for the 2020 season.
Motion, make that motion.
Okay, Mr. Cooper makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Whitcomb seconds. Discussion.
Clarification. 1 or 2?
Well, that's what we're getting
Okay,
at.
all right. I don't believe we just, I think that's the fact, we just discussed one, right?
What was your motion?
What's your motion?
Well, I was gonna make a motion to, approve the one.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine.
Just to add a little more heartburn to the discussion. If we find that one machine is not sufficient to do the work, I would assume you would come back to us and ask for additional consideration.
Correct.
That we would accept it, but I'd like to leave that in our back of our minds just in case we run into an issue.
I'm not gonna spend $9,000 a month without coming to council.
Well, I understand that. I'm just planting the seed here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is for one machine, and we have a second from Mr. Whitcomb. Is there any other discussion? If not, Mrs. Martin.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the vote as unanimous.
Thank you very much. All right, that's the end of the agenda items, I believe. Are there any additional citizens' comments? Hearing none, any other business?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor? Hello?
Nothing.
Nothing for me right now.
Nothing.
Nothing.
No, sir.
All right, at this time, we will, be adjourning to an executive session on the matter of personnel with possible action.